You are listening to the Advocates of Aging podcast. This podcast is produced by the ABA Commission on Law and Aging. Listen to hear interviews and stories on topics related to law and aging, including best practice tips for professionals and career advice. Age is not just a number, it is an opportunity for growth and fulfillment. These episodes will explore the hurdles people face when aging, as well as opportunities for improving advocacy and strengthening the legal rights of others. Introduction Part 2. You are listening to the Advocates of Aging podcast. This podcast is produced by the ABA Commission on Law and Aging. Listen to hear interviews and stories on topics related to law and aging, including best practice tips for professionals and career advice. Age is not just a number, it is an opportunity for growth and fulfillment. These episodes will explore the hurdles people face when aging, as well as opportunities for improving advocacy and strengthening the legal rights of others. Introduction Part 3. You are listening to the Advocates of Aging podcast. This podcast is produced by the ABA Commission on Law and Aging. Listen to hear interviews and stories on topics related to law and aging, including best practice tips for professionals and career advice. Age is not just a number, it is an opportunity for growth and fulfillment. These episodes will explore the hurdles people face when aging, as well as opportunities for improving advocacy and strengthening the legal rights of others. Hi, my name is Erica Costello, and I, along with Tricia Bullock, are with the American Bar Association's Commission on Law and Aging. You are listening to our Advocates of Aging podcast. Today we have with us Robyn Shapiro, an attorney and bioethicist with Health Sciences Law Group in Wisconsin. Eric Drogin, an attorney and forensic psychologist with Harvard Medical School in Massachusetts. Jacobo Mintzer, a physician and professor of health sciences at the Medical University of South Carolina. And Kyle Page, a geropsychologist at the Edward Hines Jr. Veteran Affairs Hospital in Illinois. Their bios will be provided in the podcast notes on our website. Thank you so much for joining us today. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today to talk about National Healthcare Decisions Day. I'm going to go ahead and start with our first question. Robyn, can you tell us why National Healthcare Decisions Day is important for individuals and their families?
I'd love to, and thanks so much for including me in this very important session. This day helps to raise awareness about advanced care planning, which is expressing one's preferences about medical treatment decisions and related issues in advance of a time when you may no longer be able to do that yourself. And it's so important for you, for the patient, and for families, because it helps to assure that your autonomy rights, your rights to self-govern, are going to be respected. And it helps your healthcare providers and your families know that they are doing the right thing when they're making decisions on your behalf because you're no longer able to express yourself in real time. They know that they're doing the right thing by doing what you would have them do. So it's a critical day to raise that awareness and consciousness and hopefully empower people to execute some of these documents to do just that.
Great, thank you so much. So I know that it's obviously an important day for individuals and their families as well as attorneys. So Jacobo, could you tell us a little bit why, as a physician, advanced planning is important for your profession?
Well, so first of all, again, let me add to Robyn's, thank you for having me here today. Let me start by saying that the most difficult thing about making a decision is to decide to make a decision, especially those decisions that we don't like. It's easier to decide if I want to have ice cream today. It's difficult to decide if I want chocolate or vanilla or both. So in this case, it's actually much more deep. And it's so deep because we're making decisions about situations that, although we know consciously it's going to happen, we emotionally are sometimes very difficult to accept. And when we finally accept the decision, then it usually is too late. So let me start by saying that I think the most important thing about Decision Day is that provides an environment and a space for us to make decisions, even if they are not the most pleasant decisions to be made. And why it's important? Because with the decisions, it comes responsibility. And the decisions about what's happened with us, we want to be resuscitated or not. We want to give our money to somebody or we don't. We want to relate things in a way or we don't. Who we want to make decisions for us when we cannot make decisions. All these key things are required from us to recognize that may be a situation in which we cannot do it. And probably to acknowledge that situation and acknowledge that situation with our family member, with the people we love, is very, very, very difficult. So let me just start the conversation by saying that when we make a decision about, end of life, who will make decisions for us if we can, we have to acknowledge that that situation may happen. And that's extremely difficult. So I congratulate ABA for providing a forum that encourages us and takes all the myth, the negativity of it out and adds a positive spin to the fact that we have to make those decisions. And if we don't care for us, let's do it for the people we love. Let's not put the people we love in a situation that we have to make decisions without knowing what we really want. I'm looking forward for the continue the conversation.
Thank you, Jacobo. So, Eric, why is it important for individuals and their families to engage in advanced planning?
First of all, thanks very much for the opportunity to participate. When you say individuals and their families, that's critically important. These aren't decisions that we want to make on our own necessarily, even ahead of time. But when we add the families into this, who knows what may be going on at that particular point in time when all of the sudden decisions need to be made. For one thing, there's the complicating factor of grief. For another thing, communications may be complicated. Some people may not be reachable or reachable at a certain time. Feelings may be running high. There may be those who have no idea how they can be of assistance. There may be those who have very much the wrong idea about how they can be of assistance. It can be a chaotic situation which can be made much more of a problem and which can be much more difficult to resolve if people aren't prepared, if there isn't an understanding of who can contribute and what certain people's needs may be.
Tricia, let me just add to what Eric said for a second. I lost my dad about 10 years. My dad told us, other than the legal documents, he left an envelope. We opened the envelope. And he said, in this envelope, very informally, handwriting, I would like you to do A, B, C, D, and E. And I expect this thing will happen, but when this happens, I want you to do that or the other. It was probably one of the nicest gifts that he gave all of us. And moreover, avoided any discussion and any fights or any disagreements in the family, because there was something we all had in common. We loved my dad.
Thank you, Eric and Jacobo. So what are the most important documents to consider for advanced planning?
Tricia, thanks. To some extent, the answer to that question depends on where you are, because different states have laws that codify, so to speak, different kinds of advanced directives. The two most common types of documents that you will find in most state laws are living wills and healthcare powers of attorney. And at a very high level, a living will is a document, also sometimes called directive to physician, which says in a focused way, doctor, if I am either in a terminal condition or a persistent vegetative state, I don't want life-sustaining treatments to be applied. Of course, each state is going to have language that's specific to it, but for the most part, that's what most living will statutes say. And then the healthcare provider who's treating that patient is obligated to abide by those directions or to transfer care of that patient to someone who will, or else face consequences such as disciplinary action. The other most common form of advanced care planning document is the healthcare power of attorney document. And in that document, you do a number of things. 2 or 3 are very important. The first is to appoint a substitute decision maker, an agent, as that position is called under Wisconsin statutes, to speak for you about your healthcare decisions when you no longer can do that on your own. And the second is to set out in this document your preferences, which then, by statute, the agent must follow in making those decisions and speaking for you when you're no longer able to do that on your own. So the 2 are very important. There are additional things that can happen in this document. One, by way of example, is you can authorize your agent to admit you to a skilled nursing facility, without which, under many states' law, you'd have to have a guardianship proceeding occur if you were no longer able to sign yourself in as a decisional adult. So there are a number of things that can be done in these documents, but getting back to your original question, the specific forms of these documents often will be governed by what the state law is where you are.
I think that, of course, Robyn's entirely right about this, and you'll find that the names of the different instruments change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, that the extent to which one winds up canceling out the other will change. And we'll be talking more today in just a bit about how it is that the attorneys and legal professionals can sort this out. But I'd also want to add how important it can be to have a secondary collection of documents handy. The ones that provide access, the ones that give us an up-to-date sense of what people have and are managing, where certain things may be, access to safe deposit boxes and all of those things. It's one thing to have the documentation that grants the authority and the privilege to certain people to act, but then there's also the documentation periodically updated that enables those people to act once it's been determined that now it's their time to step up.
Thank you so much, Eric and Robyn, for sharing that information about the documents. I'm going to turn now to Kyle and ask you, Kyle, as a psychologist, what do you see in your practice that emphasizes the need for advanced planning?
Yeah, really good question. And certainly thanks for convening the panel today to kind of have this crucial conversation. I would say in my practice as a psychologist, in some context for the audience, I'm primarily in a hospital setting. So those perhaps receiving physical rehabilitation care, end-of-life care, long-term nursing care. And you see it come up in many different ways, actually. Just to kind of give some examples that we come across is perhaps an individual who is isolated from others. Maybe they don't have very many family or friends with which they speak about healthcare. Perhaps they don't like going into the doctor's office, and so they don't have very many conversations with their medical team about their care and their future kind of care wishes. But then something unexpected happens, and they end up in the hospital, and they're not able to kind of clearly communicate with us what they do and what they don't want, because those conversations have not happened. and it certainly hasn't been written down. Another type of situation I would say that we might see is people are having the conversations, perhaps a married couple, are talking to each other about their healthcare and healthcare wishes for the future. But perhaps something happens to one of the individuals and they're not around. You never completed perhaps a living will, or you never completed a healthcare power of attorney document. You just always assumed that other person in your life would be there to help you when the time came. And we just find so many examples of where that hasn't been the case, especially in these hospital settings. Once had a situation where both partners in the relationship named the other person as their healthcare agent, but both ended up in a different hospital for different reasons, unable to make decisions. And it kind of created this gridlock of not knowing what to do to help either one. We also have plenty of examples where people have had the conversations with friends, with family, with the healthcare teams. They filled out all the paperwork. They filled out the secondary paperwork, as Eric is speaking to. But when the time came, unfortunately, to rely on that documentation or to look at it and kind of incorporate it, it was from 15, 20 years ago. And perhaps the person you named as your healthcare agent is no longer available. Maybe they've died. Maybe they've developed dementia in that time and they can't serve that role. Or kind of what you listed as your preferences and wishes don't reflect your current health situation and your current thoughts about what you would want for your end of life care or just kind of life sustaining care. And so we see in many different ways where it can be from someone who has not engaged very much in advanced care planning to those where they perhaps have talked about it but not written it down, to they've written it down and they haven't quite updated it in some time. And so it really comes up in different ways for people. And the concern then is that when you're in a hospital setting and we're trying to provide this care to you, we don't have your voice. We don't have your input. We don't have what your preferences and wishes are. And you may receive treatment that you otherwise would not have wanted. And so certainly crucial to kind of be thinking now about this and to be revisiting this over time. As you get new diagnoses, as health conditions change, as things in your life situation change, people come in and out of your life, those are times you want to go back to that documentation, go back and think about if that changes anything with your wishes and preferences.
I would like to talk for a minute about the process now, if that's okay, Kay, because I've been married almost 40 years. And one of the things I learned is that when my wife tells me something, although I'm convinced I understood it, most of the time I'm wrong. So I do what I think she's asked me to do, but most of the time I didn't. And that teaches me something very, very important. When somebody said something, we are not always sure that we heard what they said. And that's especially difficult in situations where an individual is in distress or talking about things they don't like. And there are other situations. Some of you may have noticed I have an accent. I never heard it, but people tell me I do. And that's important because you need to, again, clarify what happens. So what I do usually with my patients would address these issues. We ask the questions, and then I ask the family to intervene, the patient to intervene, but then I take the time to voice and said, let me see if we all say the same thing. And take the point to verbalize what was discussed and ask everybody if they understood and agree, and that's indeed what happened. And I can tell you, I heard many times that was not the case. Now, the other issue is try to prevent assumptions when we are in the process. See, we see a patient that is mildly or moderately cognitive impairment, and we assume that they don't know what they're talking about. And usually, the ability to make a decision is specific to the topic. But so somebody may not remember where I have lunch, but they know exactly what they want to do with their assets, or know exactly what they want to do when happen a medical situation. So it's very clear to be clear to understand what their deficits are and where they are not, and also when there is a deficit, help the patient to make the decision. Tell them and give the person the information they will need to complete the decision-making on their own, rather than telling, Dad, that's what you want, right? So I think that it's not an easy process. And one of the things that I'm very happy about ABA doing this today is because we can actually, in our website, I understand we just put a number of materials supported by the National Institute on Aging. I would encourage everybody to go there, look there are a number of resources, including specific lists on how to do it and training programs. So please feel free to use all those materials that are available to you.
I wanted to stress again something that a bit Eric was saying and Jacobo was just saying, that another thing that we see, particularly in the hospital setting, if you haven't engaged in this kind of advanced planning, a lot of times in the hospital, you're in this transitional period in your life. You may not know it yet. You've had this stroke, or perhaps you've fallen down and broken some bones, and you're not going to go back home functioning at the same level, or you might not go back home again. And without that advanced care planning, you're trying to make some really difficult decisions when you physically may not feel well, emotionally may be drained, there might be a lot of conflict in the family, and the hospital system may be pressuring you to make a decision today, or you're leaving on Friday, where you're going to go. And so just really underscoring the importance of the advanced planning, so you can really think through some of these really crucial kind of wishes and preferences that you want, and not when it's a crisis time.
Thank you so much, Kyle and Jacobo, for sharing those stories and experiences, because it does sound like it can get very complicated when individuals and their families don't engage in advanced planning before some of these situations come up. So how can attorneys and legal professionals better assist individuals with advanced planning? And I'll go ahead and turn this question over to Eric and Robyn.
I think one thing attorneys can do is to identify the availability of and need for these documents. And there are some attorneys who are good about this, and some who it's just not on their radar screen even now. So one thing they can do is to suggest that this endeavor might happen. And then, of course, making available tools to make it more understandable, making available forms that may be good, the state statutorily endorsed forms, other forms, and having the willingness to have a conversation with their clients about the need for and the mechanics for getting an advanced care directive is, I think, a good start. I don't know, Eric, other suggestions?
A lot of suggestions that would probably serve counsel well in any sort of practice. To budget enough time for this interaction, to be prepared to listen. There's a lot of emotional baggage that attends these issues. There are a lot of details that the client may be attempting to dredge up on the spot. There's a lot of complicated language, a lot of complicated technical, there are a lot of complicated technical notions. And as a result, counsel needs to be prepared to explain these things, not to talk down to the client, not necessarily to simplify them as much as to make them coherent. If we're talking about older persons, especially those who are dealing with some sort of progressive disorder, then the time of day may be important as well. That is an issue that we always consider with older persons, that there may be some times that are better for them and others. And although we do not make any assumption that older persons, for example, are technologically challenged, we should bear in mind that many will wish for you to visit with them in person as opposed to online.
Thank you, Eric and Robyn. And you both can add to this next question about legal issues that can result from a lack of advanced planning. So what legal issues can result from a lack of advanced planning?
Good question. Thank you. I think some we've already gone over a bit this morning. But there are others. One that I did mention, at least in some states, is that if you don't have these documents and you are no longer decisional and skilled nursing care is needed for you, there will have to be a guardianship proceeding initiated, which can be time consuming and expensive and sadly unnecessary if you had simply had one of these documents and checked the box. But that's not the only sort of legal issue that can present in the absence of these documents. In some states, and I'm going to refer to Wisconsin for the moment, there's case law around end-of-life decision-making that has rigorous guardrails about permissibility and non-permissibility of certain decisions. So, for example, in Wisconsin, we have a Supreme Court decision that says that unless there is clear evidence that somebody would not want aggressive treatment, or the patient is in a persistent vegetative state, if you have neither the one nor the other, aggressive treatment must be given because that's been deemed to be in the best interest of patients by our Supreme Court. So that leaves a huge number of people who may not have done advanced care planning documents, so may not have left clear indication of their wishes, who are non-decisional but not in a persistent vegetative state. And for them, under our law, any decision that would veer in the direction of less as opposed to more aggressive care is really legally precarious. So there are all sorts of very important, very challenging, potentially very disastrous legal implications of not having done this sort of planning.
And I would add to that that in addition to putting together the proper instruments and doing so in a legally sound fashion, a lack of secondary planning, a lack of having everyone understanding what they need to do and giving their input properly can in some instances lead to a successful challenge to a will or other advance directive, therefore setting the whole process into disarray. There may also, in certain jurisdictions, be liability for persons who have supervisory responsibilities, who are not yet prepared to take on those responsibilities, who, whether it's for the personal care of the individual or for the care of that person's assets, those legal issues can arise as well.
I want to make the point that as a psychiatrist, I can tell you that situations of stress brings the worst on any person and on any family. And if there was some kind of an issue underlying, and you would be surprised, you can talk about 60-year-old people, talk about what happened when they were 5, right? The situation becomes so difficult. And sometimes I'm sure that Eric and Rob will have the experience, sometimes legally entangled. And these issues could be easily solved if there is a goodwill from everybody or an information. I would like, one of my favorite sayings is that every good discussion is based on shared ignorance. So if we don't know what the person wanted, we will have lots of discussions and disputes. If we have information and facts, there is no discussion, there is no disagreement.
Thank you, Eric, Robyn, and Jacobo. Kyle, I want to have you answer this next question. How do issues with capacity underscore the need for advanced planning?
Oh, great question. I know if we step back for a second, like in just generally speaking, when we talk about capacity, we usually in the context of making a healthcare decision or really having these kind of different abilities that together facilitate how you make decisions about your health. So abilities such as understanding kind of what the medical condition is that the medical team is talking to you about, thinking about how that is going to apply and affect your own life and your values and what your goals are, health and personally, thinking through treatment options, perhaps people are talking to you about pros and cons, picking kind of what choice you're going to do. Just all of this together is kind of what we refer to as capacity, or at least capacity to make a healthcare decision. Now, you're making decisions, of course, outside of the healthcare context every day. You're thinking about what to eat, what to wear, how to spend your money, that it's really this foundational part of how we live our lives. And it very much is seen as kind of part of just who you are and how you are as a person making decisions. It's very important to us. But at the same time, there are many, many medical, mental health, cognitive health conditions that can affect your capacity, this ability to think through a decision and to make a decision, right? It's a very vulnerable ability that we have, right? And it can affect it in different ways, right? So you might have something medical or mental health wise that comes up and it temporarily makes it really hard for you or impossible for you to make a healthcare decision. Think of having a stroke. It might take several days to weeks after a stroke for you to come back to who you are, where you are, what happened, what's going on, and kind of what treatment decisions you're making in the moment, right? But there can also be things that just gradually chip away at your capacity to make healthcare decisions. And we think of classic examples like dementia. So dementia that progresses slowly or somewhere even, quite fast over several months to years, where it just gets harder to make decisions. It takes more time, it takes more effort, it takes more support. Maybe you can make some decisions easier than others, but at some point it might make it impossible for you to make a particular healthcare decision. So you can see how it affects in different ways for people. Now, one of the other things that we notice quite a bit when we try to have these conversations about advanced care planning or even current care planning, and we bring in this idea of capacity, and we start talking to people about decision making, you meet a lot of people who say, that won't happen to me, right? There won't come a time when I'm going to be unable to make decisions. I'm okay. Or the one that I'll hear even more frequently is, I'll let you know when the time has come that I can't make healthcare decisions anymore. I'll be able to tell when I can't, and I'll tell you now's the time to use my agent. And the reality is, at least in these hospital settings and these stressful situations and these medical or mental health emergencies that come up, that's just not the reality of how it plays out. That people seem to think that they'll know when the time has come that they can't make decisions, and that's just not always the case. And when you listen to kind of what people are kind of perhaps afraid of, or what they fear, is that they'll be removed from the conversation, is that their input won't matter, that they will lose control over their life and kind of medically, personally, what happens to them. And this is exactly what advanced care planning is working to avoid, so that your voice is heard, that your preferences are known, and that we can kind of use that to guide versus, not knowing it and trying to think on the spot. It ends up being quite crucial to this whole understanding of advanced care planning.
Let me tell you about decision capacity. First of all, to clarify to everybody, it's a legal term, not a medical term, right? So
there are clinical concepts of capacity.
right, it's a clinical concept, but so many times I've been asked, doctor, determine decision capacity. I cannot do that. I can give you the facts, and a judge will make the ultimate decision. Usually a probate judge would make that decision. But talking more about the process of how to reach this situation, if maybe we can help professionals. It's important to create a safe space where people can actually say what they want to say without consequences. There are lots of family dynamics when you go to this situation, and issues of pride, of personal pride. And as Kate said very well, it's very important that there will be an environment, a space, where the person actually can say it free of any other environmental pressures, which I think is critical. The other thing that I think is very important is that sometimes, I don't know you all, but I tend to procrastinate. I don't know if you know anybody else that does it, but usually I prefer not to go to the dentist. So when they get the appointment, usually I conveniently have something urgent that I have to do, not to do that day. So many times we have to make the decisions at the time that is not ideal, right? I always say that if somebody will sell AAA memberships on the side of the road, will be more successful than when they do it in another environment, right? Because when you have the need, you do it. So many times we'll see these individuals, as Gail said, that you are in this situation, that you are in the middle of it, and you have to make these decisions. And I want to emphasize over and over again the concept of assisted decision making. I think it's very, very important. And the second concept that I want to emphasize is that the fact, as Gail said well, that you cannot make decision on one aspect of your life doesn't mean necessarily that you cannot make decision in another aspect of your life. And part of the decision making is part of the encouraging. And I think that the primary care, the doc that knows you for all your life, right, have the opportunity to talk with you when you have no pressure, better than the doctor that is taking care in the emergency room for your stroke. So the doctor said, I know you during your life, you didn't want that or you want the other. Is it still true? And talked with the daughter and said, I know your family hold these values, but maybe different when something else happened. Or now that you have the experience that Sister Joe, Sister Judy had a different experience. So I think that it's very, very important when, and I'm promoting chaos and my jobs, right? If you go before, do it with a lawyer and try to have a professional, a mental health professional or cognitive specialist, part of the conversation, either in person or over time, but make it a positive experience and create a space where all the tools are at disposition of the individual making the decision.
I was just going to say,
Okay, go ahead, Cal.
Just to put a plug in that we're talking a lot about healthcare decisions, but I just want to expand that to mental health care as well. There are mental health advanced directives that all of these points that we're making today would very much apply.
So Kyle and Jacobo, thank you so much for that information about capacity. Is it fair to say then that it's better for individuals to be proactive with these types of documents before they get into those emergency situations or before they see that decline with their capacity?
Yeah, they will save themselves a lot of legal fees for sure.
Great. So thank you, Cal and Jacobo, for helping us understand the issues of capacity and advanced directives. Jacobo, how can doctors encourage patients to engage in advanced planning?
As I said, I think the important thing is to create a space. And one of the major things when I ask patients about this situation, I say, why you didn't make or didn't write or didn't express it to anybody before? And they say, because nobody asked me. Most people do not know. And they require the professional to ask the questions. And many professionals, especially in the medical profession, have 15 minutes to deal with everything, right? Have 15 minutes to deal with high blood pressure and cholesterol and you name it. And we all do what is easier for us to do. So one of the recommendations will be that everyone, when you start your new consult, and I don't care if you're 20 years old or 80 years old, when you start your consult, it should be part of the routine discussion. When you said, where you live and what you do, and what do you have legal documents? Have you expressed in writing your desires? Have you, what, if God forbid something happens? Because we allocate all these kind of situations to all people, right? but it can happen to people at any age. You can have a stroke at any age. You can have a car accident at any age. You can be playing football and get injured. There are situations through the life cycle. And I think the younger you are, maybe actually the most difficult to make those decisions. So, summarizing, create as a physician, create an environment where these questions is okay to ask and okay to answer, and document it, and encourage them to develop the legal documents that will document that decision, and then ask again and ask again. I'm Jewish, I love nagging. So be sure that you nag your patients until they do it right.
Great. Thank you so much for that information, Jacobo. Let's talk a little bit more about resources. So turning to Eric and Robyn, what practical resources are available to individuals and their families to assist them with advanced planning?
Well, I know that the American Bar Association is very good about this, and that it actually, through the Commission on Law and Aging, has a toolkit that I believe is available online that can be very helpful in terms of practical guidance. And Eric, I know you have some thoughts about this too.
Sure. The American Bar Association's Senior Lawyers Division, in a section entitled Senior Lawyers Resources. And this is available to all members of the public, not just attorneys and not just American Bar Association members. In its Center for Excellence in Elder Law and Dementia, there are collections of upcoming events that people can attend. There are collections of guidelines and standards. There are links to various organizations, and there's also an ever-growing collection of chapters and articles that address different issues in this area. And those are not just limited to the interests of doctors and lawyers. It was decided from the beginning that this would be a public-facing collection of materials that might benefit everyone as they're attempting to review these issues.
I do think that it's also true that many healthcare facilities, whether that be hospitals or nursing homes, have brochures and other information. State agencies that help support elderly and disabled individuals often will have forms and brochures and hotlines and so on and so forth. So I think it's gotten better in terms of raising consciousness and education and resource availability for individuals and their families to help them with these important documents.
Thanks for that information. And what about resources available to psychologists and physicians to assist them with working with individuals and their families in advanced planning? I'll go ahead and turn that question to Kyle and Jacobo.
Yeah, I'd say Jacobo's made several good points as far as that environment and creating that environment, which will be quite crucial for how clinicians will engage patients and families. There certainly are a lot of resources available on the Conversation Project website. National Institute on Aging has quite a number of worksheets available for people to work through. And one I'll say, for anyone involved in the Veterans Health Administration, quite a large healthcare network for the U.S. There's a number of resources available unique to veterans and veterans health when it comes to advanced care planning. Those types of documents in the healthcare system of the VA specifically, which are available online if you were to just look Veterans Administration Advanced Care Planning. And so things, worksheets, workbooks, ways to talk to your doctor, way to engage your team, quite a number of resources are.
I think that the problem is not the lack of resources, and I said before, and Eric and Kale really said that they are out there, and I understand they are now in the podcast web page. We send a number, I think that 15 links for different documents that will be helpful. I don't think that the problem is that. The problem is the willingness of people to use the tools, right? Tools are everywhere. The question is who is willing to take the time to click, read different documents, and learn and use and benefit from those resources. And I think what the key piece for that is, and I'm challenged the ABA here, is in addition to this podcast, which I think is a great beginning, is to get engaged in educating both physicians and lawyers to use those materials that they are out there and become familiar with them. You know, it's if the materials are sitting in a shelf or in a website and nobody uses, they don't meet their goal. So again, we need to encourage people, and I think probably the best way is through educational programs and nagging. So I'm encouraged. I know it's terrible that as a physician, I will encourage a lawyer to nag, but I really suggest strongly that that ABA should probably put CMEs in where the basis of the CME is utilization of these documents and tools. So so lawyers can get acquainted to these tools that are very easy to read and very self-explanatory.
Thank you, Jacobo and Cal. So, as an attorney, Eric and Robyn, what resources have you found that will be helpful to other attorneys seeking to assist their clients with healthcare advance planning?
There are a number of continuing legal education presentations that are put on by the American Bar Association and by the various state and local bar associations as well. These are relatively easy to identify. And I would also, again, point counsel to the many different resources that are available online through the American Bar Association, such as the ones I mentioned earlier, which are not offered specifically for CLE credit. Also, there are many resources that are provided. The Alzheimer's Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Medical Association. These are not too difficult to find, and counsel may find that a good way to identify the best of these is to consult with one's medical and other mental health professional colleagues who, like the attorney, have to get their own version of CLE and continuing legal education, and who will be able to point them in the right direction. It would not just have to be materials developed for attorneys. It would wind up being materials that are helpful for attorneys, particularly if you are retaining or on the other side from a mental health expert. It's nice to know what it is that they themselves are reviewing.
Great.
Eric and Robyn, a question. Are those tools used regularly by lawyers in practice?
Very much so. I would be concerned about a lawyer who is not willing to dig in and attempt to identify what their allies and adversaries are reading, doing, and thinking.
And great suggestions. The only additional suggestion I might make is that state bar associations themselves often will have brochures and other educational materials for lawyers. So that might be another place to look.
Yes.
Thank you all so much for your insightful comments and input into this podcast. Was there anything else either of you would like to share on the importance of National Healthcare Decisions Day?
I just want to thank all of our listeners because by being here, you have endorsed our main message, which is this is important. So thank you.
I'll just add that I hope that the National Healthcare Decisions Day becomes an annual National Healthcare Decisions Day, and that these sorts of notions are updated on a regular basis for the public.
I would suggest that the day that we changed daylight to standard time, we're told to check our different alarm systems and smoke detectors and stuff like this. That we will have an annual, as Eric said, an annual day, and in that day we all make the commitment, physicians, public, and lawyers, to take all the people we meet that day and the people we can think about it. Have you make decisions on these crucial issues we discussed today? And if we do it as a routine, again, we will establish this ritual that somebody I asked once, and I'm a storyteller. So once I asked my rabbi, how can I differentiate tradition from law? And the rabbi is very easy. He said it's very easy. Law is what people do not do. Tradition is what people follow. So we need to start the tradition that in decision day, we all review our state planning, who we decide to make decisions, and our living will.
Thank you guys so much for your comments. Thanks again for joining us. If you are interested in further information on this and other topics, check out our podcast notes on our website. You can also listen to this and other episodes by visiting the ABA Commission on Law and Aging's website and our YouTube channel. Remember to like and subscribe to be sure to get any updates. We look forward to having you join us for the next episode. In the meantime, keep on advocating for the legal rights of all.